Hello and welcome to another e-commerce in the news. This is going to be the May 2022 edition. Let's get started. Okay, so just to get things started, we're going to take a look at Pinterest, who just bought the Yes. And the Yes is an interesting platform. It's an AI-based shopping platform for fashion that enables users to shop a personalized feed based on the user's active input on brand, style, and size. So basically, it's making intelligent recommendations for users that are on the Yes site. And Pinterest is going to be taking advantage of this to integrate the technology into Pinterest platform and then defining its shopping strategy. I think this is pretty interesting from an overall perspective because basically what you're seeing in general, and if you kind of go on to read this, is a lot of social media platforms like Pinterest are acquiring other companies in order to pivot from kind of a traditional social media to more of a social e-commerce as a monetization method. Now, if you go on, you can see that they basically say that the Yes team is a group of experts at making it simple to find the right products that are personalized for the user based on their taste and style. Now, what can you take from this in general? I think one of the big things that you want to look at here is the fact that a lot of social media companies are doing this. This tends to kind of lead and be at the cutting edge of what you generally, even if you're in a B2B space, for example, what you generally want to kind of project forward over the next 3 to 5 years as to where the market is headed and how you're going to most likely want to position yourself to be in front of that. Now, the other thing that's pretty interesting is Pinterest in the release actually describes themselves as a shopping platform that brings together the unique commercial intent of their audience and the ability to visually explore products as you would in a magazine or catalog. So pretty interesting. They've made a pivot here essentially. And you can see this kind of highlighted section here is talking about how the trend in social commerce is growing. And with most of the largest social media platforms, they are entering that arena. Snap is another example. They announced last month that they now allow eBay listings to be shared in the Snapchat app using special stickers. So just a few weeks earlier, the social media platform also introduced the new AR, augmented reality tools for business. If you're not familiar with augmented reality, definitely worth checking it out and digging into. The summary, though, is they can create 3D models of products that users can actually try on and essentially see what they would look like. Really, really interesting stuff for social media and social commerce and being able to kind of interact with those. And you can imagine how that can play in the social media space and really complement each other. Also, Instagram celebrated their 3rd anniversary of their shop account last month by hosting a pop-up shop in New York City to promote their e-commerce tools. So key takeaway here is that a lot of social media companies are kind of refashioning themselves as a social commerce platform, and that's a mechanism for them to monetize. This is definitely something that you can take advantage of regardless of where you are in kind of the spectrum of being more B2C and more social media oriented or more B2B, is just kind of seeing this as a trend of having these recommendations and these abilities to kind of personalize the interaction. Okay, let's take a look at the next article here. So this next article is talking about Walmart's advanced fulfillment centers. Now, this is pretty interesting because Walmart has essentially set up 4 new high-tech fulfillment centers to be built over the next 3 years. This is going to include a lot of automation and machine learning, as well as robotics, to be able to collectively employ 4,000 workers, but essentially multiply their efforts massively. Compared to other fulfillment centers, this is going to be, I think if it goes on in the article to say about a 9x improvement in effectiveness for those same 4,000 people. The facility is going to be an automated high-density storage system that streamlines a manual 12-step process into just 5 steps. Really interesting. Through the new fulfillment centers, these 4 new fulfillment centers, Walmart could offer next day or 2-day shipping to 75% of the US population. So this is definitely something that is a key takeaway here, is that overall what you're seeing with a lot of retailers that are continuing to kind of move into the e-commerce space and continue to lay more foundation, a lot of it is about fulfillment. if you don't necessarily have direct fulfillment capabilities or investments, you can partner and work with a distribution company that can help as well. The other thing that we want to point out here is that basically these guys are doing a lot with totes and a lot within their actual fulfillment centers that's very sophisticated. Generally speaking, you're going to have software that's going to be able to handle this, not just with multiple locations, but multiple kind of areas of the location, and being able to optimize for routes and things like that whenever you have your pick and pack team going to get things, and potentially working with robotic and automation software as well. All very interesting stuff, but it dramatically improves your ability to deliver and fulfill rapidly and consistently. So if this is something that you're interested in, it's something that you may want to start planning on and start essentially looking for in advance, so that you can kind of learn from what some of the industry experts are doing, look at companies like Walmart and what they're doing, and kind of look at their overall game plan and how you can do the same thing. How can you adopt similar strategies? Maybe not to the same scale, but how can you work with partners who may be experts in the distribution space, and then kind of compare them against each other if you're not going to open direct fulfillment. The last thing is, you can see here that basically the CEO of Walmart is indicating that their automation plan is ready to scale, and they will be continuing to invest in their distribution centers, their e-com fulfillment centers, and in the market fulfillment centers, which in many cases will be inside or beside existing stores. So really interesting here as well, that they're really going to be taking advantage of their retail locations and adding to those facilities potentially as well. So that's another really interesting play. Again, consider the fact that maybe some retail organizations might want to partner and leverage distribution of their facilities. So that can be a really interesting opportunity as well. Okay, let's take a look at the next piece here. And this one is talking about how third-party software can open customers up to attack. Now, this is pretty interesting because basically, based on this analysis, they found that third-party services running on different sites that they analyzed attempted to leak 144,000 customer data records, which could have led to 1.6 million in damages. Now, this is kind of a hypothetical scenario, but the biggest thing that you want to kind of take away is that they found that about 5% of all customer e-commerce sessions are being actively disturbed by attackers on websites, where 81% of the code originated from third parties. Now, typically this is going to be tracking code, marketing code, third-party JavaScript, those kind of things, but it can also be plugins and third-party resources that are part of a e-commerce platform. So this goes on, this article kind of talks about how to keep up with the market pace, companies typically don't invest, they typically can't afford to develop every single component of their e-commerce website internally. The problem is that the cost exponentially increases, and this kind of deferral of the cost to third parties actually increases the exposure to risk exponentially. So there's kind of a hidden cost with using third-party code related to not just security, but absolutely, at minimum, at least security. And even if the code your team writes is built to be secure, plugins or other software dependencies can inadvertently or maliciously introduce vulnerabilities or data leaks that can expose users to risk. So you really want to be thinking about this as part of your long-term strategy, and at least evaluating with a skeptical eye, a little bit of cynicism, whenever you look at bringing in a third-party component. The general thought here is you want to take ownership of your customers' data and make sure that you are seeing it as a good steward kind of relationship with their data, especially when you're dealing with third-party plugins, not just third-party scripts, not just third-party marketing resources, but also plugins and adjustments to the core platform. A lot of these have updates, and the updates can be insecure and can be infected. The other big thing that we want you to take away, and there's a lot of detail here that you can look at in this particular article, is that basically whenever you're dealing with different size sites and different software platforms, they do have updates that come in different forms. A lot of the bigger players, they're going to be building almost, if not completely, custom code, whereas the smaller players, as this article goes on to say, they tend to use common tools. those common tools, along with their third-party plugins especially, are going to be getting a lot more attacks presented to them. And those attacks are going to look for vulnerabilities, especially with outdated code. So if you take nothing else from this, keep a cadence of updating your code quite often. And you want to also subscribe and be a part of any kind of vulnerability notification around any plugins, third-party tools, and the overall platform that you're working with, so that you can get access to kind of recommended updates and upgrades. And then generally it just makes sense to upgrade consistently on a cadence. If not, whenever there's a security vulnerability, you would just do at least, every 6 months, 3 months, every month, depending on how much traffic and vulnerability you have with your site. The other thing here that these guys highlight is that essentially the findings really illustrate how dynamic all the services are and how quickly a benign third-party service can become infected and leak sensitive data with no awareness from the victim website. One of the things that is kind of no surprise they go on to say is that security standards such as PCI DSS are now requiring e-commerce websites to keep an updated inventory of all of their website scripts and monitor in real time for the addition of any malicious code, such as e-commerce skimming code. And so you're going to want to think about this and how this is going to apply to you, how you can prepare for this, and rather than kind of be overwhelmed by it and reactionary, how you can be basically proactive and plan for this upcoming. Okay, let's dive into the next article now. So this one is talking about digital marketing for e-commerce, and this is pretty interesting. So this is a survey, and basically it was a survey of 1,015 online shoppers. And essentially, they wanted to, in this survey, kind of understand their buying behavior and how these shoppers respond to online advertising and the role of social media in particular. So one of the questions was, which of the following marketing efforts influence your decision to make an online purchase? So this is pretty interesting because a lot of the users are saying that 44% of them contribute a substantial part of the post-purchase of kind of like being influenced by post-purchase communication flow. And so this includes offers that are part of a shipping or order confirmation. So within a shipping or order confirmation, we're providing additional upsell or additional options to buy, maybe get support or coverage for a warranty, really kind of any related items. Any items left in the cart, of course, abandoned cart emails, back in stock emails, these kind of things tend to serve as confidence builders, and they allow the shopper to kind of move back into buying mode. So data-wise, this is a really, really potent source. And of course, as you probably well know, email is, especially transactional email, we already are working with the customer. We might as well design a funnel that's going to really help them to feel like we're giving them full support. And in turn, they're going to feel more comfortable and want to tend toward being more loyal and shop with us more on these e-commerce transactions. So really, really interesting. Basically a free marketing technique to just kind of take more advantage of these existing relationships and provide more value to them all at the same time. One of the other things that was interesting about this data is they were talking about how traditional postal type of mailers, advertisements, etc., are still very effective. And you can see the data here. Basically, one of the things that you can do, again, is kind of use existing buyers and send them something physical in the mail. Now, depending on your industry, this can be really effective because no one else in your space may be doing this, or they may not be doing this very effectively. So you can, for a relatively low cost, give them something physical that's going to be in their space and help them reconnect back to make those purchases online. Now, there's a lot more data here that you can dig into, and I recommend it as a interesting resource if you're wanting to kind of look at social media, marketing, transactional emails, and these type of things and how you can optimize those. It's a great data source to see how to prioritize your efforts to get a high payoff with a relatively low cost and low kind of transactional ongoing cost. One of the things that they talk about in this survey is that basically 72% of online shoppers open email advertising at least a few times a week. and 43% pursue daily or more. So essentially, the idea here is you don't want to send stuff too often. Typically, more than once a day is too much. For most audiences, in fact, more than once a week is too much. So you want to kind of get an idea of your audience and essentially how often they prefer to get content. But you can see here that a lot of respondents will actually open email with advertisements daily or a few times a week. So that's a pretty kind of sweet spot there within this data. Open rates are one thing, but buying is what really counts. And essentially what they're saying is that about 2% who purchase daily, kind of the more aggressive folks, about 2% of those folks will purchase things daily, and 16% will shop weekly for or a few times a week. So essentially, this is talking about purchasing rate based on email frequency. So for folks that are getting emails and they're opening them, usually the ones that get them weekly or once or twice a week, they're going to have about a 16% purchase rate. There are 22% who never purchase or rarely pursue the emails and take a chance with making those purchases. Here you can see, again, this is kind of like the sweet spot is monthly. So kind of weekly, monthly is a pretty big sweet spot. And depending on your space, you may really be concentrating your effort around a monthly kind of promotion or a monthly touch base. But something, whether it's weekly, a couple times a week, or monthly, somewhere in there is generally what this data is showing to be a sweet spot for actually purchasing. Whereas actually opening the email more toward once a week is going to get higher open rates. So interesting data. This does have a ton of information in it. I'll just kind of wrap up by saying that essentially the main thing that you want to take away from this overall data is that whenever you're constantly following up with your users, but you're doing it in a kind of take advantage of the transactional interactions you're already having kind of a way. So shipping confirmations, recommendations, asking for ratings and reviews, providing them with status updates, maybe asking them to fill out a survey. You can include things in that, promotional items, reminders, abandoned cart information, similar products, recommendations. You can include that, and users are going to be very prone to open that, of course. And it will, depending on how much you emphasize those promotions, hopefully it's more of a kind of secondary promotional element. If you do it right, it's going to build credibility while still allowing you to move buyers back into that transaction process. And then if you're taking advantage of things like loyalty programs, physical items that you supplement your digital marketing with, your digital emails in particular, this is really going to help kind of continue to funnel people back in. They also looked at a lot of things like retargeting, being able to kind of focus on retargeting as well. And they had some interesting data around this, basically that it didn't necessarily have a high response rate, which was interesting. But these are things that can be done in combination, and you want to look for ways that you can kind of squeeze the most out of those existing relationships. Transactional emails, order confirmations, fulfillment status tracking, surveys, reviews, these kind of things. They seem to be a really big sweet spot that a lot of e-commerce sites do not take advantage of. So think about that and think about how you can help your users, sending them recommended similar items, promotions, but doing it once a month or once a week tends to be kind of the output from this data as the optimal amount. Okay, let's take a look at the next article now. Okay, so this next article is talking about the top 1,000 North American retailers and how they hit 1 trillion in e-commerce sales. So this is pretty interesting, and basically there was a growth rate of 67.6% in 2020 versus 2019. So year over year growth rate. And then 15.7% for 2021 versus 2020. So a substantial growth rate in 2020. But this goes on to break that data down. And it's some pretty interesting breakdown of the data. But kind of one of the main things here, one of the key takeaways is that the top 1,000 hit over $1 trillion in collective revenue. And then basically there's more detail here in general. But you can see that just overall, if you look at the overall kind of retail online space, there's a 3x growth rate versus 2019. For the top 1,000, though, it was more than that. It was 67.6%. So kind of the top 1,000 online commerce platforms they delivered a much higher kind of potency and more value, and so they got more of the market and more of that growth. So that's really kind of a trend in this space. You're going to see the bigger players are tending to take more of the revenue consistently. Now, this particular report goes in to break down the different types of e-commerce websites. So they're looking at multi-channel versus online only. And this is pretty interesting. So they're actually breaking it down into direct marketers, retail chains, consumer brand manufacturers, and web only. So these are the number that are in the top 1,000. And then these are the top industries within the top 1,000. So you can see a lot of apparel and accessories, a lot of houseware, home furnishings, sporting goods and hardware and home improvement, consumer electronics. Those are some of the big kind of quantity in the space. Now, what does this mean? Basically, if you are in a space that is kind of covered by one of those, then you can really learn from some of the best and replicate what they're doing and basically reproduce that in your niche. Kind of the big takeaway that I recommend that you see here is that if you take a niche within these kind of very densely populated categories, then you can really dominate the niche typically. Now, once you own a niche and you've really kind of gotten yourself a foothold in that niche, then you can expand beyond that and just continue to add depth to your ownership of that key area. A niche can really be a lot of different things. Now, if you're in one of these areas that doesn't have a lot of e-commerce competitors and it's more of an open space, then one of the things that you can do is you can learn from these competitors that are doing a lot of volume in some of these categories like apparel and accessories. Typically, they're going to be experimenting with things that are going to be far beyond where your space might be with your competitors. So you can kind of project forward 2 to 4 years, sometimes even 5 years by looking at some of these more competitive spaces. So that's a way that you can kind of pull the future forward and see what's going to happen without having to make a substantial investment. A lot of things that these folks will try, they're not going to work very well, and they may not work well in your space. So you want to kind of see how they're doing it, see how you could adapt it in your space and kind of learn from them very inexpensively. The other thing is they're kind of talking about merchant types, so web only versus retailers and retail chains. So here you can see you've got consumer brand manufacturers, and in 2020 there was a lot of growth. 2021 a lot of growth. You can see though the direct marketers really didn't benefit the same. Retail chains really had the kind of disproportionate growth in 2020. So basically making themselves capable of buy online, pick up in store, be able to kind of deliver, in person, take advantage of third-party services that do delivery, and increase their fulfillment kind of footprint essentially for retail chains. That's really what helped drive a lot of that growth. And then again, they kind of didn't benefit from the same growth in 2021. Web really kind of got an even distribution. They kind of struck the middle on 2020 and 2021 growth. One of the other things that was interesting was just looking at the fastest growing industries. So this might be somewhat surprising. So interestingly, jewelry, sporting goods, and flowers and gifts were at the top of the list for growth percentage. And then you can see just a list of some of the top retailers and some of their growth. So some of these folks actually lost traction. So you can see that Best Buy, Wayfair, and Kroger lost some traction, whereas Costco, to continual growth here with Amazon, Walmart, Apple, Target, they had a lot of growth. And so what you want to do is kind of see what are these players that are having a lot of growth doing that's working, and what are a lot of these players doing that are losing some of their hold in the market? What are they not doing right? What are they messing up on? Now, we have some really interesting videos that talk about this. We do audits of even some of the sites that are here. You're welcome to take a look at those. They're really interesting. And we ultimately are happy to help provide you with more resources in our playlists and on our channel. One of the other interesting things is just looking at an absolute growth measure. And here you can see some of the top growth companies. And it's interesting to analyze what these companies are doing right. What is causing them to grow so much compared to all of these other competitors in the space, especially if they're large companies. So is it sustainable? Is it something that's going to keep working? And most importantly, how can you replicate it within your business? All right, so with that said, we're going to wrap up with one last article, and this one's pretty interesting. It's talking about how we can better the customer experience with data. Now, data is a pretty challenging aspect because with e-commerce and with all of the third-party tools that we are inundated with data that isn't necessarily correlated. It isn't necessarily highly refined and really kind of established as a relationship to all of the other data that we're accumulating en masse within the enterprise. And so basically what this article is talking about is how we can prioritize this data. And essentially what this article is going into is how we can kind of focus on the end result that we want from all of this data collection and how we can kind of enrich that target end result with our customers. So the high level here to start with is that we need to expand the vision for the customer data and really prioritize the depth of knowledge and understanding of what the customer's needs, passions, and motivations are. Now that can sound kind of high level, but if you think about it, this is really important because you can get a lot of data, you can get a lot of traffic, you can get a lot of things to happen, but ultimately if you're not delivering value within your space for your customers, what are you doing? What are you really delivering? And so you want to kind of have that as a constant North Star within your entire organization. What are the customers' needs? What are their passions and what are their motivations? And then essentially, how can we collect data that's going to help us enhance this experience for them? If we don't know what this particular customer is looking for, what they're focused on, and we're not able to kind of intelligently present to them what they're looking for, this is going to add a lot of friction. And as you probably well know, within the e-commerce space, the users are looking for a low friction experience. That's just part of the equation for who they're going to work with online. The other thing is you can use measurement as a catalyst for change. So by tracking metrics such as performance, experience, satisfaction, word of mouth, growth, churn, etc., you can meaningfully connect customer experience to business performance. So this is really interesting. So you can kind of look at your data for conversion rate optimization and these types of things and tie it right back into overall satisfaction, growth, word of mouth, those kind of things, churn for your customers, and relate those pieces of data back to each other. So you can really get a good understanding of kind of what the customer journey looks like whenever they're engaging in the long term. So this goes on to say that your customers don't just engage with your marketing team. Their data also exists across sales, commerce, and services. So each department needs to work together. In other words, you don't want just enhanced and really high fidelity data on the kind of upfront part of the funnel. You really want to think about this on the entire journey for the customer and use it as a feedback loop to go from great customer experiences further down the funnel with a long-term customer relationship, and then feed that back into your marketing and sales so that you can find more related customers that are a great fit. This is easy to talk about. It is not easy to do. Typically, you're going to want to look at your long-term strategy for how you're going to do this and what are a few key data points and get those done. A lot of times boiling the ocean with something like this is going to lead to complete failure. Whereas if you focus on 1, 2, or maybe at most 3 key metrics that you're going to follow a common thread throughout your entire experience, that will give you great results, disproportionate results compared to most competitors because they'll never get to all the overwhelming amount of data they're trying to collect. It's just how it ends up working in reality. Now, one of the other things that they talk about is how you can assess how what you're measuring as well as the capabilities required to successfully how and what you're measuring and the capabilities required to successfully get that information. There can be a big heavy lift for getting some of the data. So you kind of need to make it not just what is the information we actually want, but what can we realistically get in the short term, in the near term, that's viable, that we can actually consistently get. Finally, then the main thing here is offering customers convenience will no longer cut it. If you look at all of the competitors out there, they're all offering self-service of some form, automation, and convenience. Now it's about being able to offer frictionless interactions that are aligned across the different channels. You have to really put yourself in your customer's shoes and their different scenarios and their different points in the customer experience pipeline, and think about what they're actually looking for. Talk to them, find out what they need. Get these kind of common sets of data, but not too many, so you actually can do it and you can actually accomplish it. And then follow those threads all the way through the customer's journey. Finally, by treating the end customer like a human relationship, which is what it is, and offering consistency, communication, creativity, and authenticity, you're going to give yourself this really powerful differentiator relative to the competition, especially in some of the spaces where this isn't a dominant thought process. You're going to give yourself a huge leg up within your space. Think about it. If you establish this credibility, this authenticity on top of all of the other frictionless kind of conveniences, powerful benefits of your product and overall value within your space, you're going to be unstoppable. Nobody's going to be able to touch you, and you're going to have an upward spiral. We would certainly love to help you with that. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe so you can check out some of our other videos. If you're interested, we also offer a complimentary discovery. And overall, just generally, we want you to take full advantage of everything we have on our YouTube, all of the videos that might be able to help you out, as well as our website, www.clarity-ventures.com. Thank you very much for watching, and bye for now.